In the small town of Ashford, nestled among the rolling hills of Virginia, life moved with a peaceful rhythm. The townspeople knew each other by name, and at the heart of this quiet community stood St. Mark's Church. More than just a place of worship, the church was the soul of Ashford, a refuge, a place of comfort, and the domain of Father Daniel McKinnon, a beloved figure in the town. Father Daniel had served Ashford for over a decade, offering his guidance in both spiritual and worldly matters. His words were often the final say on any issue, but it was his unshakable faith and sense of righteousness that would soon thrust him into the center of that would rock Ashford to its core. Maria Grayson, a 30-year-old woman with a heart as pure as gold, was one of the church's most devoted members. She was well known for her generosity, organizing Sunday school for the children and helping the elderly with chores. Maria had a bright smile and kind eyes that seemed to radiate warmth, making her a beloved figure in the community. Yet no one could have imagined that this very church, steeped in prayers and goodwill, would become the setting for an unspeakable act that would leave everyone questioning the nature of good and evil. One cold October morning, Maria Grayson disappeared. She wasn't at the Sunday service, nor was she seen strolling through the park with the neighborhood children. Her phone calls went unanswered, and her home appeared hastily abandoned. The town grew uneasy, and after a few days, the search for Maria began in earnest. No one expected to find her body, especially not in the sacred halls of St. Mark's Church. What should have been a place of sanctuary became the scene of a grisly murder, shaking the town's faith to its foundation. What followed was a slow unraveling of a dark story that revealed the hidden depths of the human soul and forced Ashford to confront harsh truths that no one could hide from, not even behind the walls of the church. It all began with the discovery of Maria's body in a quiet, shadowy room within the church. Her death was no ordinary tragedy, it was a brutal, cold-blooded murder. The shock of it rippled through the community, but the greater horror lay in the revelation that the man they had trusted with their deepest secrets, Father Daniel, was at the heart of it all. The investigation into Maria's murder began to tear apart the fabric of trust that had held Ashford together. As the days passed, it became painfully clear that evil can fester in even the most righteous of hearts. Ashford was no longer the same quiet, peaceful town. A cold autumn wind swept through its streets, stripping the last leaves from the trees as an invisible tension lingered in the air. On the morning of her disappearance, Lisa Carter, a close friend of Maria and a regular volunteer at the church, went to St. Mark's as she went to sang. Usually Maria would already be there, tending to the flowers or arranging candles, but that day the church was silent, eerily silent. As Lisa walked through the dimly lit corridors, a growing sense of dread gnawed at her. Something was wrong, though she couldn't yet grasp what it was. Her footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, leading her to a small room near the back of the church. Pushing the half-open door, she found a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life. There, on the floor amidst scattered books and papers, lay Maria's body mutilated beyond recognition. Bloodstains marred the sanctity of the room, and beside Maria's broken form lay a bloody cross. The sight was not just one of horror, but of betrayal, a perversion of everything the church was supposed to represent. Lisa screamed, but her cry was swallowed by the cold walls, and in that moment, her world came crashing down. The church, once a place of refuge, had become a site of darkness. The police arrived soon after, their footsteps heavy with the weight of what they would find. Among them was Detective Allison Harper, known for her sharp intuition and methodical approach. From the outset, she knew this case was unlike any she had worked before. The crime scene was brutal, yet oddly clean, too clean. There were no signs of a struggle, and Maria's personal belongings were untouched. It was as if the killer had known Maria well, perhaps even intimately. As forensics gathered evidence, the town buzzed with rumors. How could such a heinous act occur in their tight-knit community? Ashford had always been a place where doors remained unlocked and neighbors smiled at one another in the streets. Now, the very symbol of their faith, St. Mark's Church, had been stained with violence, and suspicion began to spread like wildfire. The more Detective Harper and her partner, Mark Ridgway, dug into the case, the more tangled it became. Maria was not the simple, serene woman everyone thought she was. In the weeks leading up to her death, she had grown withdrawn, haunted by something she never shared with anyone. Her diary, discovered among her belongings, revealed cryptic entries about a man in the church, a shadowy figure, who had been following her, even within the sanctuary of St. Mark's. Father Daniel, the town's pillar of morality, quickly became a person of interest. His calm demeanor in the face of Maria's murder seemed unnatural, even to the detectives. While he offered to help with the investigation, something in his behavior struck Allison as off. His alibi for the night of Maria's murder was shaky at best, and as the days passed, it became clear that the priest was hiding something. As the investigation deepened, Ashford's once harmonious community began to unravel. Whispers of dark secrets, hidden behind the facade of the church, filled the town's cafes and street corners. People who had once been devoted followers of Father Daniel now questioned his every move. Was this man who had preached about sin and redemption with such fervor capable of something so vile? Allison and Mark followed every lead, re-interviewing witnesses, re-examining evidence, and combing through financial records that revealed an alarming number of irregularities within the church's accounts. The money trails pointed to something far more sinister. Father Daniel had been involved in questionable real estate deals and was hiding an illegitimate child. Could Maria have discovered these secrets, making her a target for silencing? As the pieces of the puzzle began to come together, the detectives learned of a mysterious man who had been seen leaving the church the night Maria was murdered. This man, identified through grainy sect footage, was later found to be Stephen Fletcher, a shady private investigator hired by Father Daniel to intimidate Maria into keeping quiet. However, things had spiraled out of control, and when Maria attempted to flee, Fletcher had panicked, killing her in a fit of desperation. Fletcher's confession sealed Father Daniel's fate. The priest, once a revered figure, had orchestrated Maria's murder to protect his own secrets that could have destroyed his career and his carefully crafted image of holiness. The final blow came when Father Daniel was arrested, and the truth of his actions was laid bare for all of Ashford to see. The trial of Father Daniel McKinnon was a watershed moment for the town. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, many of whom were still in disbelief. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: Fletcher's testimony, financial records, and the diary entries that revealed Maria's growing fear of the priest. Father Daniel, once a man who stood at the pulpit delivering sermons of hope and salvation, now stood before the court in silence, his fate sealed. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The aftermath of the trial left Ashford in ruins, not physically but emotionally. The church, once the heart of the community, now stood empty, a hollow reminder of the trust that had been shattered. Parishioners abandoned it, no longer able to reconcile their faith with the horrors that had taken place within its walls. Lisa Carter, Maria's closest friend, left Ashford in the months following the trial, unable to bear the weight of the tragedy. The loss of Maria and the betrayal of Father Daniel had scarred her deeply. For others in the town, the healing process would be long and slow, but the lesson was clear: evil can hide in the most unexpected places, and the truth, no matter how painful, must always come to light. Aftermath and community impact. As the trial of Father Daniel McKinnon drew to a close, the town of Ashford was left grappling with the fallout from the horrifying revelations. The community, once united by their shared faith and trust in St. Mark's Church, was now fractured. The sanctuary they had looked to for guidance and comfort had become a symbol of betrayal, and many parishioners found it impossible to return to the church that had been the backdrop for such tragedy. The shock of Father Daniel's crimes reverberated through every home in Ashford. For many, the knowledge that the man they had trusted with their spiritual lives had orchestrated such a heinous act was too much to bear. Some families, who had been pillars of the church for generations, withdrew from the congregation entirely. Others sought solace in neighboring towns, attending churches far from the tainted memories of St. Mark's. The once bustling Sunday services dwindled to a trickle, with only a handful of parishioners remaining. In the months following the trial, the church itself fell into disrepair. The once immaculate grounds became overgrown, and the stained glass windows, which had once reflected light and hope, now stood dim and forgotten. St. Mark's, once the beating heart of Ashford, had become a monument to the darkness that had taken root in the community. Lisa Carter's departure. For Lisa Carter, Maria's closest friend and one of Father Daniel's most loyal supporters, the aftermath of the trial was unbearable. Lisa had stood by the priest even as the evidence against him mounted, unable to reconcile the man she knew with the monster he had become. But after his conviction, the reality of what had happened and her role in defending him became too much for her to cope with. Lisa's faith in both the church and herself was shattered. She had been one of the few who had clung to the belief that Father Daniel was innocent, and when that belief was proven wrong, she was left adrift. Unable to face the judgmental eyes of her neighbors and the overwhelming grief of losing her best friend, Lisa made the difficult decision to leave Ashford. She packed her belongings and moved to a neighboring town, hoping that the distance would allow her to heal from the trauma and rebuild her life. Amelia Ross and the church's decline. Amelia Ross, the church's long-serving secretary, also found herself in a difficult position after the trial. Her involvement in the investigation and her knowledge of some of Father Daniel's darker secrets made her a pariah in the eyes of many parishioners. Some blamed her for not speaking up sooner, while others saw her as complicit in the cover-up of the priest's sins. Amelia had tried to do the right thing by cooperating with the investigation, but in the end, she found herself alienated from the very community she had spent years serving. Amelia chose to stay in Ashford, but her life was never the same. The church where she had devoted so much of her time and energy was now a hollow shell of its former self, and the respect she had once enjoyed from the community was gone. She spent her days quietly, avoiding the gossip and rumors that continued to swirl around the town. For her, the tragedy of Maria's murder and the downfall of Father Daniel was not just the end of a chapter in Ashford's history, it was the end of the life she had known. John Miller's investigative series. John Miller, the local journalist who had covered the trial from its earliest days, found his work gaining widespread attention. His articles, which delved into the complex web of lies, betrayal, and corruption that had led to Maria Grayson's murder, were published not just locally but also in national outlets. Miller's investigative series raised important questions about the nature of faith, trust, and the ease with which people can be deceived by those in positions of power. In his writings, Miller explored how Father Daniel had managed to maintain his grip on the community for so long, despite the growing evidence of his misconduct. He examined the psychology of cult-like devotion that some of the parishioners exhibited, noting how difficult it was for people to accept the reality that someone they admired could be capable of such evil. His articles were widely praised for their insight, but they also stirred up controversy in Ashford, where many residents felt that Miller was exploiting the town's tragedy for personal gain. Ashford's road to healing. For Ashford, the road to recovery was long and difficult. The town, once a place of peace and unity, was now divided by mistrust and doubt. The murder of Maria Grayson and the subsequent trial had exposed deep fissures in the community, and it would take years for those wounds to heal. Some residents turned to other churches or spiritual practices, while others abandoned religion altogether, disillusioned by the betrayal they had experienced. Over time, the town began to rebuild itself. New leaders emerged, determined to guide Ashford through the healing process. Community events were organized, not at St. Mark's but in neutral spaces, where people could come together and find solace in one another's company. Gradually, the gossip and rumors began to fade, and a new sense of normalcy returned to the town. But the memory of what had happened would never fully disappear, and for many, the scars left by Father Daniel's betrayal would remain for the rest of their lives. The legacy of Maria Grayson. Maria Grayson's memory, however, endured in Ashford. Her kindness, generosity, and selflessness had touched so many lives, and even in death, she continued to be a source of inspiration for those who knew her. The town held a memorial service in her honor, and a scholarship fund was established in her name to help local children attend school, one of the many causes Maria had supported during her life. For Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway, the detectives who had worked tirelessly to bring Father Daniel to justice, the case remained a defining moment in their careers. It was a reminder that even in the quietest of towns, darkness can lurk beneath the surface. Their work on the case had been grueling, both physically and emotionally, but in the end they had brought the truth to light. The investigation had taken a toll on both of them, but they emerged from it with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to continue seeking justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. Conclusion: a town forever changed. The story of Ashford, Father Daniel McKinnon, and Maria Grayson serves as a stark reminder that evil can take root in even the most unexpected places. The quiet town, once defined by its faith and community spirit, was forever changed by the events that unfolded within the walls of St. Mark's Church. For the people of Ashford, the tragedy was not just a loss of life but a loss of innocence, a shattering of the trust they had placed in their leaders and their faith. Though the town would eventually heal, the lessons learned from the murder of Maria Grayson would remain. Ashford had been forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that even those who preach righteousness and morality can hide dark and terrible secrets. In the end, the pursuit of truth, no matter how painful, became the town's salvation. Father Daniel's duality, the mask of holiness. Father Daniel McKinnon had always been a man of contradictions, outwardly a pillar of strength, wisdom, and spiritual guidance, yet inwardly tormented by darker impulses. His sermons were delivered with the fervor of a man deeply committed to his faith, and his strict adherence to religious doctrine had earned him a reputation for being both a moral compass and a figure of authority in Ashford. Parishioners sought his counsel on matters of life and faith, and his words often carried the weight of final judgment. But behind the facade of righteousness lay a man who harbored secrets so dark that they would eventually destroy him. In private, Father Daniel wrestled with guilt, shame, and the burden of living a double life. His involvement in illicit financial dealings and the existence of his illegitimate child were only the tip of the iceberg. These hidden sins weighed heavily on him, yet he had perfected the art of compartmentalization, convincing himself that his public persona was the true reflection of who he was. He had built his life around the idea that he was invulnerable, that his position in the church would shield him from any consequences. But as Maria Grayson began to piece together the truth, the carefully constructed mask that Father Daniel had worn for so long began to crack. The relationship between Father Daniel and Maria was more complicated than anyone realized. Maria had come to view the priest as a trusted mentor, someone to whom she could confide her deepest fears and doubts. But as she grew closer to him, she began to see glimpses of the darkness that lurked beneath his piety. Their conversations had grown increasingly tense in the weeks leading up to her death, with Maria expressing unease about things she had discovered in the church's financial records and documents. She suspected that Father Daniel was involved in something far more sinister than he let on, and the realization left her conflicted. In her diary, Maria wrote about feeling trapped, torn between her loyalty to the church and her growing fear of Father Daniel. She knew too much, and Father Daniel, sensing that she might expose him, became increasingly paranoid. The power dynamic between them shifted where once Father Daniel had been the one in control. Now it was Maria who held the key to his downfall. This reversal of roles deeply unsettled the priest, who saw no way out but to silence Maria before she could reveal his secrets. Maria's inner struggle, fear, guilt, and the burden of truth. For Maria Grayson, the church had always been her sanctuary, a place where she found meaning, purpose, and a sense of belonging. Her faith was the cornerstone of her life, guiding her actions and decisions. But as she uncovered more about the corruption and deceit within St. Mark's Church, Maria found herself grappling with a moral dilemma. She had devoted her life to the service of the church, yet she could no longer ignore the growing evidence of Father Daniel's misconduct. In her final weeks, Maria became increasingly isolated, burdened by the knowledge of what she had uncovered. Her once bright and confident demeanor faded as she wrestled with the decision of whether to come forward with the truth. She understood that revealing Father Daniel's secrets would not only destroy him but also tear apart the fabric of the community she loved. Ashford was a town built on faith, and Father Daniel was at the heart of that faith. If she exposed him, it would mean exposing the hypocrisy that had festered within the very institution she had dedicated her life to. But Maria's conscience wouldn't allow her to remain silent. She began to distance herself from those around her, withdrawing from the social circles she had once been a part of. Her diary entries from this time reveal a woman torn between fear and duty. She wrote of feeling as though she was being watched, even within the sacred walls of the church, and of the mounting pressure to keep quiet. She confided in Lisa Carter that she was deeply troubled but stopped short of revealing the full extent of what she knew, perhaps out of a desire to protect her friend from the danger she sensed was closing in on her. In her heart, Maria knew that she had no choice but to act. She arranged to meet Father Daniel one last time, intending to confront him about what she had discovered and give him the opportunity to confess. But what she didn't realize was that Father Daniel had already made his decision. He had hired Stephen Fletcher, a private investigator with a reputation for doing the dirty work of powerful men, to intimidate Maria into silence. When that plan spiraled out of control, Maria found herself face to face with a man who was willing to kill to protect his secrets. The town of Ashford, the fragile nature of trust and faith. As the details of Father Daniel's crimes came to light, the town of Ashford was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The man they had revered for so long was not the moral leader they had believed him to be. The scandal shattered the trust that had bound the community together, leaving a void that many struggled to fill. The faith that had once been a source of strength for the town had been weaponized, used to manipulate and control. And this realization left deep scars on the hearts of the townspeople. In the aftermath of the trial, Ashford was divided. Some residents refused to accept Father Daniel's guilt, clinging to the belief that he had been framed or misunderstood. For them, the idea that their spiritual leader could be capable of such evil was unthinkable, and they sought to preserve his legacy, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Others, however, were consumed by anger and betrayal. They felt duped, as though their loyalty to the church had been exploited, and their faith shattered beyond repair. The division in the town was palpable. Longtime friends turned against each other, and families were torn apart by differing opinions on Father Daniel's guilt. Even those who had once been the most devout found it difficult to reconcile the image of the man who had led them in prayer with the monster who had orchestrated Maria's murder. The very foundation of their community had been shaken, and in its place was a sense of disillusionment and mistrust. As the town grappled with its new reality, many sought to find meaning in the tragedy. For some, it was a lesson in the dangers of blind faith, a reminder that even those in positions of power must be held accountable. For others, it was a call to re-examine their own beliefs and the systems that had allowed such evil to go unchecked for so long. The unseen consequences, psychological fallout in the community. The psychological toll of the events on the town's residents was profound. The sense of safety and predictability that had once defined life in Ashford had been replaced by a lingering sense of unease. Anxiety and fear permeated the community, with many residents struggling to process the trauma they had experienced. For some, this manifested as a reluctance to trust others. For others, it was an inability to move past the events and rebuild their faith. Lisa Carter, Maria's closest confidante, was one of the individuals most deeply affected by the murder. Her departure from Ashford was driven not only by grief but also by a profound sense of guilt. She had defended Father Daniel until the very end, unable to believe that the man she had known for so many years could be capable of such heinous acts. When the truth came out, Lisa was left feeling as though she had been complicit in Maria's death. She had ignored the warning signs, blinded by her own loyalty, and this realization haunted her. Amelia Ross, the church secretary, also experienced significant emotional fallout. Though she had ultimately cooperated with the investigation, her silence in the early days of the case had allowed Father Daniel to continue his deception. Amelia had been privy to many of the priest's secrets, yet she had turned a blind eye out of fear for her own position within the church. The weight of that decision bore down on her in the months following the trial, as she found herself ostracized by the community and consumed by her own sense of responsibility. The psychological wounds extended beyond those directly involved in the case. Parents who had once brought their children to St. Mark's for Sunday school now found themselves questioning whether they had been naive to trust in the church's authority. Elderly residents who had relied on Father Daniel for guidance in their twilight years were left feeling betrayed and abandoned. The collective trauma experienced by the town created an undercurrent of fear and uncertainty that would take years to heal. The legacy of Father Daniel and the search for redemption. As Father Daniel sat in prison, the man who had once been a spiritual leader to hundreds of people was left to confront the enormity of his actions. His conviction had stripped him of his power, his reputation, and his freedom, leaving him with nothing but his own thoughts. Yet even in his darkest moments, Father Daniel struggled to accept full responsibility for what he had done. To the end, he believed that his sins had been justified, that the preservation of his status and the protection of the church were worth the cost of Maria Grayson's life. The search for redemption, however, was not limited to Father Daniel. The town of Ashford, too, was on a journey of healing. As time passed, efforts were made to restore the community's sense of unity. New leaders emerged, emphasizing the importance of transparency, accountability, and compassion. Slowly, the town began to rebuild, though the memory of what had happened at St. Mark's Church would never fully fade. Maria Grayson's legacy lived on, not only through the scholarship fund established in her name, but also in the hearts of those she had touched with her kindness and generosity. Her life, though tragically cut short, became a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, there is always light to be found.